and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. Here's what we're looking at.
We Illinois Republicans have not won statewide since 2014.
And meet the candidate looking to change that. Former Illinois Republican Party Chair Don Tracy joins us to discuss his bid for U.S. Senate. And local trans leaders come together to discuss issues affecting the LGBTQ+ community. First off tonight, Supreme Court justices sound skeptical of President Donald Trump's order attempting to limit birthright citizenship. Trump himself attended part of the oral arguments at the High Court today, a first for a sitting president. Birthright citizenship is enshrined in the 14th Amendment and was affirmed by an 1898 Supreme Court case. Here's a bit of the U.S. Solicitor General defending Trump's executive order to Chief Justice John Roberts.
We're in a new world now, as Justice Alito pointed out to, where 8 billion people are one plane ride away from having a child who's a U.S. citizen.
Well, it's a new world. It's the same Constitution.
Mayor Brandon Johnson is moving to oust the head of the Chicago Housing Authority Board after board members defied the mayor and made their own choice for a permanent CEO to lead the agency. Last month, the board voted 7-2 to hire Keith Pettigrew ahead of the Washington, D.C. Housing Authority. Today, Johnson claimed CHA Board Chair Matthew Brewer appointed Pettigrew in a, quote, unilateral decision, an action fully inconsistent with the Housing Authorities Act and bylaws of the CHA Board of Commissioners. But Brewer and the other board members who voted for Pettigrew shot back, saying the process was completely above board. Quote, the mayor may disagree with the outcome, but rewriting the facts doesn't change them, and mischaracterizing the law does not change the actual law. Johnson's move to force out Brewer was first reported by Crain's Chicago Business. The owner of a now shuttered West Suburban hospital says he wants to reopen the facility, but a local lawmaker representing the area is expressing some doubts. Owner Dr. Manoj Prasad and State Representative LaShawn Ford addressed the temporary closure of West Suburban Hospital in Oak Park today. Ford outlined financial problems brought to his attention by state agencies. Prasad, meanwhile, blamed many of these on previous ownership and says he's taken measures to right the ship.
We reduced the vendor debt. We went into an austerity plan. So we eliminated a lot of waste from the system. There was a lot of waste happening. Everybody thought, oh yeah, this is the good old days. They were spending like there was no tomorrow. Well,
Dr. Prasad says he hopes to reopen the facility this summer. White Sox fans looking forward to cheering their team on in person will have to wait a little longer. Tomorrow's home opener against the Toronto Blue Jays has been postponed. Because of expected stormy weather, the game has been moved to Friday afternoon at 1:10. Tickets for the Thursday game will be honored on Friday. The Sox are looking to rebound from a 1-5 start. And just moments from now, NASA's Artemis 2 mission is expected to lift off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission will carry 4 astronauts on a journey around the moon and marks the first time astronauts have returned to the vicinity of the moon in more than 50 years. The trip could break the manned flight distance record by traveling farther from Earth than any human ever has, going around the far side of the moon. The launch had originally been scheduled for February and then March, but technical issues pushed it off until today. Up next, meet the candidate hoping to become Illinois' first Republican senator in 10 years. He joins us right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Former Illinois Republican Party Chair Don Tracy won the GOP nomination for U.S. Senate, pushing him closer to taking over longtime Senator Dick Durbin's seat. He's facing Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton in November's general election. Tracy is making his case in a state that hasn't elected a Republican to the Senate since 2010. And joining us now is Republican candidate for U.S. Senate Don Tracy. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So why are you interested in becoming Illinois' next senator?
Well, it's an important seat. I feel like I've got the skill set to do it. You know, I tell people all the time, everybody should run for public office because it's an important thing, and a democracy that you need to have citizen participation. And I've been in the private sector for many decades. I've been a lawyer more decades than I care to admit, but I've also been in business, and I owned and operated my own small business at times when I had to struggle to put food on the table and make payroll at the same time. But I think one of the hardest and most important of all human endeavors is politics. And I feel like I've got the skill set, being a lawyer and having succeeded in business as well, to do this. I'm also a student of history as well. And I just think more, you know, what I'd call normal, everyday Illinoisans need to be involved in politics instead of just career politicians.
And you feel like you can offer that with some of the background that you have outside of the political realm.
Right. I mean, I have significant political experience, having been chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, elected twice there. I've run for office a couple times before, and I've been helping elect Republicans throughout Illinois in the run for public office the last 20 or 25 years. But I'm not a career politician.
Indeed. And as we mentioned, you know, Illinois hasn't had a Republican in the Senate since 2017 or a statewide officer since 2019. When you left your post at the state GOP, you had some concerns that there was more infighting among Republicans than there was focus on defeating Democrats. Do you still see that as an issue?
There's infighting in every party and in every state. You know, and it's a problem. When I took the job as chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, they told me I had two main things to do. One was unify the party, and the other was to raise money. And I thought unifying the party would be the easiest part. Boy, was I naive. Because when I was chairman, you know, there was infighting that would break out all over the state, and it's like whack-a-mole. And then it got to the board level, and that's when I said, well, this, you know, I've done it for 3.5 years. It's time for somebody else to do it. But in a way, it seems like my candidacy for the U.S. Senate has helped unify the party. You know, I won every county in Illinois except for 4 small ones in southeast Illinois, where unfortunately I didn't get a chance to spend any time.
So hoping to reverse that trend.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you know, President Trump scheduled to address the nation in just a couple of hours to discuss the war on Iran. What are you hoping to hear from the president?
Well, I'm hoping to hear that we're continuing to make progress, that it's going to be a very short conflict, and that we will have successfully degraded Iran's nuclear ambitions and its intercontinental ballistic missile ambitions, and its base as the largest sponsor of state terrorism in the world, and that this will lead to, at long last, peace in the Mideast and elsewhere.
So you would be looking for, you know, hopefully this conflict to come to an end relatively quickly.
Absolutely.
You know, the president, as we mentioned earlier today, attended Supreme Court oral arguments about his executive order looking to do away with birthright citizenship. You've spoken, you know, at length about immigration in your campaign. Do you support the president's position here?
Yes, I mean, from a policy standpoint, I certainly support it. I am a lawyer, but I've not studied I haven't read the briefs in this case. It's a complex issue. It's really odd that we have pure birthright citizenship right now, unless the Supreme Court says otherwise. I don't think there's any European country that has pure birthright citizenship. It's just weird to me that you can just take a vacation to the United States and have a baby there, and your baby is, you know, a citizen of the United States, and that people can intentionally do that. And yet you can be in the country illegally, and if you have a baby, your child is a citizen of the United States even though you're here illegally. It's just a weird thing, but we'll have to wait and see what the Supreme Court says, what the actual law is.
Sticking with immigration for a moment, House and Senate Republicans reportedly have a deal to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, but excluding funding for the time being for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There have been a number of national polls showing, you know, disapproval of ICE. How do you assess the Trump administration's immigration enforcement efforts in Chicago and several other U.S. cities?
Well, we have to remember how we got here through the Biden open borders policy, 10 to 20 million unvetted and plus getaway immigrants came into this country illegally. And then the question is, what do you do about it? Well, the federal government has a responsibility to enforce immigration law. And I think the administration has done a pretty good job of that throughout the country, except in sanctuary cities, where there has been massive resistance, not only by many in the population, but also by the political leaders of like Chicago and Minneapolis, for example. But in areas where there's not been that massive resistance, has worked pretty well. I lived in Memphis and for about 10 years as a traveling salesman, and then as a law student, and then as a lawyer. And I visited Memphis recently, where they just had a federal surge in immigration law enforcement, and it's worked out great down there. But the governor cooperated, the local mayor, the Memphis mayor cooperated, and there, as a result, they had 7,200 arrests. They removed 1,100 illegal firearms from the streets. They removed a lot of narcotics and contraband, and they found 152 or 142 missing children. And carjackings are down almost 50%. Murders are down there. And Memphis, like Chicago, is a murder capital on a per capita basis. So, it's been very successful down there, and in New Orleans and D.C. and other places where the local authorities have cooperated. But where they're not cooperating, the administration needs to find a better way to enforce immigration law, particularly in the sanctuary cities. And I'm confident Tom Homan would do that. Tom Homan was border czar under Obama, got an award from Obama for doing that job. He was border czar under Trump 1, and now he's back in charge of enforcing immigration law in the sanctuary cities. And I'm confident he'll figure out a better way to do it than what we saw here in Chicago.
Affordability has been a focal point of your campaign. How would you work to lower costs for Illinoisans?
Well, I certainly wouldn't follow the Democrat approach, which is to increase cost of living. That's one thing we agree with. The Democrats and Republicans agree that cost of living is a huge issue in this country. But it's a huge issue because of Biden inflation, over 20%, 20 to 30%, depending on who you talk to, the highest inflation in almost 47 years. And the Democrats say, elect us so that we can reduce the cost of living. But everything Democrats do increases it. The spending under Biden increased inflation, which increases the cost of living. Their war against traditional, affordable, reliable energy increases utility prices, particularly in closing down power plants prematurely, as they're doing here in Illinois and elsewhere. Their health care approach, which is government-run health insurance, that's what my opponent supports, which will cost trillions of dollars. That's as a result, health care inflation is running at 3 to 4 times regular inflation. Housing is increased in part because of bringing in 10 to 20 million unhoused immigrants and attracting them to Chicago with $3 billion in benefits, government benefits. That's had to put pressure on an area where you already had a shortage of housing. And then crime, being soft on crime, as a result of that, we have an epidemic of shoplifting in this country, not just in Chicago, not just in San Francisco, but in my hometown of Springfield. Talk to any store clerk and they'll tell you people walk out with stuff all the time and they're told not to do anything about it. That's increased the retail cost of everything you can carry out of store. So in contrast, for like healthcare, we believe in more market competition, more price transparency, more consumer choice, and better drug price negotiations. And on energy, we believe in more energy production and not going green overnight. I mean, we Republicans, we're environmentalists, and we have been. My birthday is on Earth Day, but we're rational. We consider ourselves rational environmentalists. President Nixon started the EPA, a Republican president. But trying to go green overnight is going to bankrupt this country.
All right, 7 months until the general election. We hope to speak with you plenty of times before then. Don Tracy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And on a programming note, the Democratic candidate running for U.S. Senate, Juliana Stratton, is set to join us on the program Monday evening. We're back with more right after this. In an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court this week ruled against Colorado's ban on conversion therapy for gay and transgender youth over concerns it violates the First Amendment rights of mental health providers. The controversial practice has been criticized by medical professionals and those in the LGBTQ+ community, with critics calling it abusive and ineffective. The ruling came during yesterday's Trans Day of Visibility, marking what many call an anti-LGBTQ+ attack on a day dedicated to celebrating that community. Here to discuss issues facing trans people in Chicago and beyond are Shannon Lynn Parker, CEO of Equality Illinois, Asher McMaher, founder and executive director of Trans Upfront Illinois, and Silas Leslie, advocacy and community engagement manager and special projects trainer and data analyst at Chicago Therapy Collective. You're a busy person. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. Silas, we just mentioned this ruling yesterday. Do you think the Supreme Court's move could make it more difficult for people in the LGBTQ+ community who are seeking mental health treatment?
Absolutely. I think it opens doorways that really denigrate and take away, standards of care for folks looking to have mental health care. I think generally there is a need for more affirming, affordable mental health care for the LGBTQ community. And I think this decision just largely and greatly, makes it more difficult to find safe care.
Yeah, putting barriers into place for people who really need it. Shannon, according to the ACLU, in 2026 alone, there have been some 500 anti-LGBTQ+ bills introduced around the country at the state level. Kansas, for example, recently passed a bill voiding driver's licenses if a gender marker doesn't match someone's birth certificate. Even if these bills don't become law, what kind of an effect do they have on trans folks around the U.S.?
They're coordinated attacks. These are demoralizing. They are demoralizing bills that are being proposed that absolutely diminish the humanity and the lived realities of trans people. The goal is to expose them to the general public, those who will cause harm, and put them in immediate threat of danger and in harm's way.
Yeah, and I want to get to that later on because that is a huge issue. Asher, as we mentioned yesterday, was International Trans Day of Visibility. What's the significance of that celebration?
Trans Day of Visibility, especially this year and really every year, is incredibly important because we are able to come together as a community and celebrate who we are and be visible for people who can't. Right? There are so many people around the country right now who are scared to be out and who they are, and we want to come together to remember that no matter what's happening, they can't take our community from us, they can't take our joy from us, and now we are here to celebrate every person, regardless of what that means to them and where they are in their lives, and that there are people here fighting for them.
And you mentioned people who, may not feel comfortable, may not feel like they're in a place where they're seen. According to UCLA's Williams Institute, there's more than 382,000 trans youth living in 29 states with a restrictive law or policy. That's more than half of all trans young people in the country. A lot of them come to a more welcoming place like Illinois. What kind of work does your organization do to support them, maybe connect them with things like gender-affirming care?
Yeah, absolutely. So our organization serves trans individuals ages 4 to 25 in their support systems without any financial barriers. We founded the Gender Affirming Care Navigation System so people can come to us and get matched with mental health, medical, surgical. We just solidified our partnership with Elevated Access. We can provide free flights and transportation to people to get them out of their red states, whether it's temporarily to access care or permanently to move into the state. And we just started the Gender Affirming Care Fund that we can actually cover the costs of medical care. We know right now, especially with these coordinated attacks by this administration, we're moving into a time in which this care is becoming a privilege to pay out of pocket. And we want to make sure that no one's left behind.
Shannon, even though many trans people feel more welcome in places like Illinois because of laws aimed at protecting them, certainly no place is immune from challenges. What are some of the issues you see facing trans Illinoisans or trans Chicagoans?
Not being a bad state is not enough, right? That should be a given. We see systems capitulating way before they have to, right? We're so fortunate to have a supportive governor and a supportive attorney general who has said emphatically, do not stop providing gender affirming care, particularly for minors. But yet and still we have institutions who are going ahead of that order and doing so, which is causing a great deal of harm and anxiety for a lot of the folks who rely on those safety nets for care.
Yeah, I mean, how about that, Silas? That, even if you are, someone who's already receiving this care, you're not in immediate danger of losing it. Seeing those organizations pull back from their commitments, can that have an effect on folks and make them feel a bit less secure?
Absolutely. I think, things like this have a chilling effect and really impact the ability for folks to get that care and feel secure that, there is a safe space, that there is a safe place left in the country. And folks rolling back care in places like Chicago just really reinforce that we are in a time that is incredibly dangerous to be trans.
Your organization is working with State Senator Mike Simmons on a measure that would remove LGBTQIA+ identity as a symptom of mental illness. Why is that significant?
Yeah, absolutely. The bill, SB 594, modifies or amends the definition of mental illness to explicitly exclude LGBTQ identity. This is critical in a time when the political zeitgeist around trans folks is using language like trans insanity, trans lunacy, and this is a very dangerous time, and we're seeing this pathologization of LGBTQ identity, and bills like this, especially in light of that conversion therapy ban decision from the Supreme Court, these protections, these shield laws in Illinois are especially necessary.
And you mentioned earlier some of the threats that folks face. In 2024, Sun Times reported on research out of Florida State that found law enforcement agencies, many of them not tracking homicides of trans people. 300 in about a 10-year period with only a 14% clearance rate, many of them Black and Latinx women. Are enough people paying attention to this threat?
No, they're not. They're not paying attention, but they are also unaware of the threat as well. When information goes unreported, that's less education opportunities for the public to be made aware of when it comes to the plight and the experiences of trans folks. I used to work inside the Cook County Department of Corrections, and I've seen firsthand the harms from the system, but also the history of abuse that led folks to being just as involved in the first place. So again, it is a vicious cyclical cycle that trans folks, particularly Black and brown trans women, experience.
Asher, for people who are unfamiliar or uncomfortable or maybe even hostile to the trans community, what do you hope they take away from conversations like this?
I have the privilege of traveling the state all the time and meeting people. And for me, I'm always about a really good conversation. I want to hear what misinformation have they been hearing? What conversation can we have? We're people. Every person is an expert on who they are. And when I get to sit down with people, even those who are hostile, my goal is always for them to learn a little bit more. To learn that each person just wants to live their life and who they are. These kids just want to go to school and learn, go to work without having to worry about harassment or about losing their job. We're all just individuals living our lives in the most authentic way that we can.
All right, we appreciate you all here sharing your thoughts. Shannon Lynn Parker, Asher McMaher, and Silas Leslie. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. You can watch President Trump's address to the nation on the Iran war right here at 8 p.m. Be sure to sign up for our free email newsletter, The Daily Chicagoan, at WTTW.com/newsletter. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Local reaction as the U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments on a birthright citizenship case. We leave you tonight with shots of NASA's space launch today, carrying the first astronauts to fly by the moon in more than 50 years. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm with more than 40 years of experience in medical malpractice.